Oh, okay. So I'm started. So here's entry number 1 of my driving to work series. As I mentioned earlier in a post on Google, I have a 15-minute drive every day. I usually go home for lunch, so that's usually about I don't know, an hour in the car every day. Not a huge commute, but it gives me a lot of time. A lot of times I will actually sit here and kind of talk out loud to myself about things. So I figured it might be a good time to actually maybe record a video log of some of these conversations. I don't know, why not? It's just like blogging, except you get to stare at me as I drive. I am paying attention to the road, so don't worry about it. So for this first video, actually I kind of wanted to talk about PAX East, because yesterday marked the end of the I don't know what, the fifth PAX East? Man, 5th PAX East. I believe it started in 2010, and here in 2015, that I guess, my math ain't that good, but that adds up to 5. So anyhow, PAX East. Originally there was, PAX Prime out in Seattle. PAX has always been about the consumer, and it was created kind of in response to industry events like E3 or GDC, which are generally for the industry. The consumer really isn't invited to those events, and so the guys at Penny Arcade, decided that we needed a consumer-focused version, and it's kind of like Comic-Con in that respect, in that there's a whole bunch of industry people who show up wanting to get their stuff in front of the eyes and the hands of the consumer ahead of schedule, so that they can keep the hype going, and get some PR, so on and so forth. So PAX Prime started in Seattle. Then second one was PAX East, which came into Boston in 2010. I was pretty surprised when they picked Boston because New England is generally, in my opinion, pretty much ignored by the gaming industry. We do have a couple companies up here. We do have a healthy indie development scene, but we got to face it. The most part, you got most developers in the United States are either in the South or in the West. So, they brought it to Boston, which for me was fantastic. It's 45 minutes away. I was anticipating something a little further down the coast, so I was pretty psyched. And the first few PAX East events were really, really good, really packed full of great companies, a lot of great events, a lot of great panels. This year, I'm sorry, I don't mean to skip over it, but I think it was last year was the inauguration of PAX Australia, for Australia. And this just goes to show that the PAX organizers are actually focusing more on who needs it the most. So there was Prime, which is fine because that was in Penny Arcade's backyard. Then there was PAX East, which ended up in New England. So they recognized that New England was kind of a black hole as far as this industry is concerned. And then came PAX Australia, which, as people in Australia know, I'm sure, and as the rest of the world understands from the people in Australia telling us this, it's pretty shitty to be a gamer in Australia because A, their internet's not that great. B, they get titles incredibly late. C, they're incredibly expensive. And D, they have pretty restrictive laws on the levels of violence and sex and drugs and things like that that you can put into a game that we just don't have here. So the land of Mad Max actually is extremely Svengali when it comes to video games. So PAX went down to Australia and says, we feel for you, man, have an event. I don't know, that's my interpretation. Anyhow, so Australia came online last year or the year before. This year we saw PAX South. Now, okay, I get that, if we think about PAX in terms of going where the consumers are, South makes sense. The South is kind of in between Seattle and Boston. It forms a little triangle because the PAX South was located in San Antonio. So if you whip out your map, you could draw a little triangle that shows you that they're roughly, I don't want to say equidistant, but it makes sense. So the only problem I have with that is that PAX South is kind of really close to where a lot of development is. But again, it's for consumers, and they can't just walk into game studios and say, "Hey, give me a tour." Anyway, the larger concern that is PAX fatigue, both from a consumer standpoint and also from a developer and exhibitor standpoint. Now, when there was one convention that was fantastic, that's where the industry had to go. Anybody who wanted to show up there had to be there. Even if they had the slightest inkling, if they wanted to be included, they had to be there. Okay. 2 PAX, pretty much the same thing, especially since they were on, opposite ends of the calendar. So you show up at PAX Prime, in the fall, and then again at PAX East in the spring. Made a lot of sense. I mean, I don't think it was really that much of a hardship. It was the 2-cycle industry option. If they had something to announce, it could be announced in the fall. PAX East would be a great place to do that with with the consumers in attendance. I'm sorry, that was PAX Prime in the fall. And if you had something to announce in the spring, PAX East was the place to do it. And then, of course, the bigger, huger, massive announcements were E3 and GDC and stuff like that. But those are, industry-focused stuff. And I really hate to exclude PAX Australia from the rest of this conversation, but, they're kind of... they're the outlier right now. We'll get back to that later. Then, PAX South, though. And again, I understand that putting it in someone else's backyard is a nod to the consumer who, was in between East and Prime. But PAX South was, what, 2, 3, I don't know, it was like a month ago. And yet, we had PAX East. So, the end result being that PAX East this year was very weak. Very weak. We only went down for a day, and originally I was really kind of bummed about that, but after having attended and returned, I'm actually kind of glad that we didn't spend the whole weekend there. The largest presence, I think, was Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns. Their display was quite massive and quite beautiful, actually, with the plants and everything. That was really nice. There were other larger displays there. The Halo, there was a Halo tournament that was actually off in the Q room, which this year was taking the place of League of Legends. League of Legends was not in attendance this year. That booth is usually super packed, full of people cheering and screaming and everything like that. But I was taken over by the Halo tournament this year. The other booths, there was, let's see, we had Elite Dangerous was there. I didn't get to see that, unfortunately. Overwatch was there. Gigantic was there. Let's see, who else? There were others. They had, I don't know. The fact that it's been less than 24 hours and I can't even remember who the hell was there kind of goes to show you that this is not a very memorable event this year. Really odd. The 2 probably most popular booths this year were Twitch and YouTube. And I didn't understand why people were wrapped around these things. So I asked a friend, I'm like, what's going on with these booths? Why are they here? Why are they so popular? Why are they snarling traffic? And it turns out that people were getting in line for up to 2 hours, if not more, to meet streamers and YouTube celebrities. I'm just going to remain silent for a few seconds while you think about that. Yeah, so people lined up to meet other people, other random, just generic people with a webcam. So, you look at the map, and a lot of the booths were all kind of the same size. There was no huge booth, no huge singular booth. There was nobody really overpowering anybody else. And those elements that were represented were not really all that spectacular. What they did, what they had this year was a whole lot of filler. And by filler, I mean there were a shitload of indie booths, indie game developers, a lot of vendors, a lot of hardware booths, MSI, Logitech, Gunner Optical, of course, for some reason, who keeps showing up, Zotac, CPU Magazine, all of these folks. Actually, I'm sorry, Wargaming.net actually had a very large presence. We spent an inordinate amount of time there, actually, playing their World of Warships, or just watching, which actually looks pretty cool. Yeah, everything else was pretty much indie booths or hardware manufacturers. Now, the thing about that is, I'm not really a super huge fan of the indie scene, mainly because I'm not really a fan of a lot of the types of games that indies tend to put out, but, I don't have anything really against them, okay? But the thing is this, is that their booths are not incredibly large. They do have the indie mega booth, which essentially is a full-size booth that's subdivided among independent developers. So they get together and, I don't know, have an arena battle to figure out who gets to be in that booth. Everybody else is relegated to small booths on the periphery, which are essentially just a curtain and a desk. And it's really kind of sad to walk down this aisle and see these poor folks who are trying to, entice people who just spent 2 hours, in a AAA game line, but who aren't even making eye contact, who are actually going out of their way to avoid making eye contact with, these poor indies who are giving them the "please stop by my booth" eyes. So, the concern is that this is not an event that's worth going to. Bottom line, PAX East is not really about the reveals. It's about going there to see what's there, and it's also there also is some feedback. It's the consumer will say, hey, look at all these wonderful companies that took time out of their PR schedule or added enough money to their PR budgets to show up to this local event of mine to, talk to me and to show me their products. That makes you feel really good. That's why PAX East, I thought, was really, awesome. They're coming out here. The inclusion of PAX South, however, I think siphoned off a lot of attendance this year. Being so close to PAX East, and this was the concern, that PAX South would do exactly what I think happened, which is siphon off companies who found it more economically viable to go to Prime and South, which are closer to where the action is actually happening, where the development is actually happening. Now, granted, this year is kind of an anomaly. We'll have to see next year, because PAX South, this was their first year. So, of course, everybody had to show up and say, we haven't forgotten you, PAX people of the South. People of the South. We want to make a good showing of it. And the backlash then is, of course, that these companies didn't have the money or the interest or anything really worth bringing to the table for PAX East. So now we have a gigantic hole between East and Prime. What I really hope doesn't happen is PAX Midwest. And I'm really sorry, Midwest people. I know that's kind of a shitty thing to say, being someone who actually got their own PAX and was really excited about it, but I think if we added another PAX, we're really going to be screwing everybody over. Because if companies really aren't coming to all of these PAX events because there's just too many of them, adding another one is just going to make it significantly worse for everybody. The best case scenario I think that we have to look forward to right now is if they alternate years. So Prime probably every year, and then switching between South and East every other year. That way you could guarantee that all the companies get to go to each of the locations in turn and don't actually have to drop any location. So that's that was PAX East this year. I'm very sad to see what it's become, at least this year. I'm hoping next year will be better once PAX South gets into the swing of things and companies realize that if they're going to actually approach the consumer, they're going to have to maybe make a choice. Smaller studios will probably have to make a choice. Larger studios, maybe they can make the trip, but we'll have to see how it shakes out between all of these different locations, and I really hope that they don't start overly diluting this, overly diluting everything by just bringing in more and more and more packs. So this was the first video log, so I will try and post this to YouTube, where hopefully you'll be seeing it, and that's really all I have to say. So I gotta get into work now and figure out what kind of disasters are awaiting me today. So thanks for watching.